John, how are you?
I'm wonderful. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, amazing. I'm so glad we have got Dove to thank for bringing us together, the beautiful Dove from above, as I
Beautiful dove. Yes, that's true.
the Dove from above, as I like to call him now.
Dove what?
The Dove from above.
The dove from above. Oh, that's very nice. I like cute.
Yeah, I had a wonderful little video message from him with my friend Laura. They were having dinner together a couple of nights ago in New York, and they both had sunglasses on in the shape of hearts.
Oh, really?
They sent me a little message. It was sweet.
How sweet. Yeah, that would be fun.
And that's your neck of the woods, yeah? You're in New York.
Yeah, I'm just about an hour north of New York City.
Okay. And is that the same location since all the way back in 73 when you first sort of met Helen and
Yeah.
Bill or
Yeah, yeah. Actually, Helen and Bill, and well, Helen and I live very close together in the city. She was on East 17th Street. I was on West 20th. So it was just across town. It was easy to get together to have sessions, or of course it was always the phone. That was even easier. Or Ken lived on directly across the street from Helen on 17th Street.
wow.
He did that on purpose so to make it easy for them to get together. And
Yeah,
then they both worked at Columbia University.
yeah.
So, and Helen didn't like to take subways. So they would take taxi cabs. And you can imagine the amount of work that they got to go all the way from 17th Street to 168th Street,
Wow.
west side, uh, every morning or all business days, you know.
Wow.
Wow. Yeah.
Just the two of them.
Just the two of them, yeah. He was really the son she never had, you know. That was very nice.
And he was devoted to her as well, wasn't he, by all accounts?
Oh, totally, totally. Ken was with Helen, I think, almost every day. There'd be some exceptions to that, but almost every day.
Wow. And courtesy of Bill's guidance, we've got you to thank for the completion of the psychology pamphlet as well, haven't we, by all accounts?
Well, yeah, I think it would have been done in any event, but somehow or another I was a stimulus for it. Yeah,
Amazing.
yeah.
And then in 1975, you got your Xerox copy. Could you remind me how many there were in that first batch? Because I was trying to say to my wife earlier,
Uh,
I couldn't.
300.
300.
So
Wow.
there were 300 copies that were in. I don't know how many of those exist. I had one of the final copies and I gave it to Tony Ponicello at the Miracles
Yeah.
Center in San Francisco because he begged me for it. He wanted to put it in a glass case, which is actually in a glass case. Worshiping this thing. Not really, but you know what I mean.
Because Tam Morgan was saying that she's still got the typewriter that Bill used.
Oh yeah, yes, of course. Well, Judy was really good about collecting things,
Right.
pictures and newsletters and stuff like that. And I would feed her things that I had so that she could add it to her collection.
I think Tam was threatening to open like an ACIM museum or something one day.
She's got enough material for it.
And
Yeah,
there'd be enough people who'd love to see that stuff.
I suppose so. Yeah, sure.
Just to see what, it'd be
Yeah,
lovely just to see it for what it is.
yeah.
So I'll tell you what's interesting for me is like you've explained to us that Helen was your mentor for like between maybe 1975 to 1980 when she passed.
She died in February 9th, 1981.
81, right? Beg your pardon.
Well, but she got ill in 80, and I
Oh, I
didn't.
see.
From the time she became ill, I didn't see her anymore
Yeah.
because she didn't want to see anybody. She
Hmm.
kind of actually let herself go, but I mean, she wouldn't dress, she didn't fix her hair,
Hmm.
things like that. So after that, it her husband and the doctor, she would get to fix herself up to what to see the doctor and stuff like that. But and Ken and Judy and her husband and Louie, and that was it.
Yeah.
She didn't mix with people anymore.
I'm interested, like the dynamic of like how you how you reflect on the fact that Helen was quite open about struggling with material, wasn't she? In terms of there's something she said along the lines of I know it's true, but I don't believe it, or something like that.
Yeah, right. Well, sure. I mean, you can't help but know it's true.
Yeah.
But for all of us, it's the same thing about application of the principles to our lives.
Yes.
So that's where she fell down. It
Okay.
was applying these own principles in her life, like not being judgmental, for example, right? Well, Helen could be judgmental. So it's like, what do you do about that? You know, I mean, that's where the rubber meets the road, as they would say.
Mm.
And she knew that she was being judgmental, but she couldn't quite avoid that somehow or another, you know. So that's what she meant. Yeah.
And did that how did that shape your mentoring then?
Well, when I say mentoring, I don't mean she didn't really help me understand
Hmm.
what the course said so much.
Hmm.
That was Ken.
Right.
Ken took that role, and Ken was like older brother,
Okay.
right? So Helen actually helped me in really practical things. Like I went through three different romantic relationships during the 5 years I knew her.
Right.
And so there was a lot of emotional turmoil and stuff going on.
Okay.
So when that happened, I would go see Helen
Ah,
and
right.
and talk to her about what do I do about this, or more was on the phone than anything, but there were a few times I would actually physically would go over to see her.
Right.
Not in her apartment, I might add, but in Ken's apartment, which was across the street, or kind of catty corner across the street. I don't think she wanted her husband Louis was a bit of a pack rat, and his Bible was the New York Times. And as my understanding, there was actually stacks of New York Times around and stuff like that. But Helen didn't. That's why people weren't just invited in. You know,
So you had to go to Ken's sparsely furnished apartment.
right? And it was very sparse.
Makes me
It was
wonder if
almost,
he'd already sort of started to go down the route where he was thinking about becoming a monk or
oh,
what.
definitely. Oh yeah, he was already on the way.
Yeah.
In fact, as he had dispensed with some of his most valuable, his clarinet,
Ooh.
typewriter. I mean, all these things that you had to have. So he had to get another clarinet and a typewriter. You know. But there were no whatnots, no knickknacks. You look around here, I've got all kinds of knicky-knack stuff, but he had none of that stuff.
And what's your recollection of like, I'm interested, like we can like almost not retrospectively sort of analyze the model of like ACIM and sort of say, Judy used to famously say, it's got quite an Eastern vibe, which I think is a great perspective with the non-dual stuff as well,
Oh
particularly.
yeah, sure.
And then we know that it was absolutely brimming with psychology because
Oh
obviously
yeah.
Helen's,
That's why it's no accident this was given to two
yeah.
of the top psychologists at a major university, an Ivy League university, known for its research, with the oldest university in New York, who got this information. So, I mean, they understood Freud and Jung, primarily Freud, that was their base, and they understood depth psychology, and it really requires a kind of depth under approach. The course is so incredibly deep. And even when you think you've got it, it's just, oh, this is deeper, especially the metaphysics. You start getting into the metaphysics, and you say, there's no world. Well, there really is no world. I mean, it's like, what? What? Which isn't actually too hard to understand when you start thinking about, well, first of all, we all only have 80 or 90 years here or something ourselves. So where are you then when you're not a part of this world? You're not even here. You know, maybe you're in space time, yes, but then the course is so clear about the fact this is a dream. This is all a dream that we're all having all the time. And especially when you look at the insane dynamics of the dream, like stuff that's going on right now, the war in Gaza and the Ukraine, and but this is a world where there are wars. There's always been wars going on here. This has not been a peaceful place. And how many people are really happy? I mean, you know, you're trapped inside this, first of all. You're kind of stuck in the body, you know, and then relationships and some, well, some of the relationships are very nice, but then it's like, oh God, how did I get this kid? You know, or, or this husband or this wife, and you know, I've got to live with this person, or and you gotta find your way through it, or it beats living alone, or maybe it doesn't. You got to work that all out for yourself. As the course says, this is an insane world, and don't underestimate the extent of this, the insanity. So just being normal. Yeah, that's one of Ken's basic principles. He said, just be normal.
Yeah.
Just try to be a normal person in this world. Or actually, I'm beginning to teach a class in January.
Okay.
I'm calling it living a lucid life, which is kind of like living within the dream, knowing that it's a dream, but it's okay. I mean, it's okay. You're not going crazy, and it's not a nightmare.
Yeah.
You can figure out a way to live here in such a way that you're just normal person trying to figure out how to have relationships and, you know, be healthy and economically and physically and every other way. Just be actually there's a lot of similarities between the course and Buddhism and Taoism, you know, just in terms of just be balanced. You have a balanced life so that you're not falling off into depression or some other kind of insanity that this world might force upon us if we gave in to it.
Mm.
Yeah.
That's amazing, because one of the first things that I wrote down to ask you about is about developing a consistent vibe internally that isn't at the mercy of external factors.
Right. I mean, that's what it kind of comes down to in a lot of ways, learning how to live in an insane world, but be peaceful within the insane world. You living within the dream, knowing it's a dream, but it's okay. And what's okay about it is don't get plugged in to the insanity of the world. If you get plugged in, if you take, let's take the Gaza situation for if you're taking sides one way or the other, or if you're taking political sides one way or the other, right? If you're a conservative, you're a liberal, or whatever you are, then you're putting yourself under a lot of stress. Yeah. So the position is just, you know what you want to do, you know what you believe. So just maintain that kind of centered, balanced state where you can be here and be okay with it, but also know that you're going home, you know, and that the centered path is the way home. And you can't be in one extreme or another. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because there's something that you said which really spoke to me, which was let me just find it. I've got quite a few things here. You know, talking about the Course in Miracles perspective of the world being a classroom.
Mm,
But something you said, which I thought was brilliant, you can only wake up if you learn you've been sleeping.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah, you got to know that you're sleeping. You know, you got to know that that's why I'm talking about this class I'm teaching in January,
Okay.
living a lucid life.
Mm,
Because what is lucid dreaming?
yeah.
So lucid dreaming means that you know you're dreaming, but you're awake within the dream. So being awake within the dream means that you're not entirely subject to the dynamics of what is going on, because you can see what's going on and you can therefore maintain your balance a lot better than just going off the deep end in one way or another. Right? No
Beautiful.
need for that.
Does this mean you're
Nor are
going
you
to?
going to let something of the world take you. Like you're not going to let an addiction of some sort take you,
Mhm. Mm.
which is easy to do. It's easy to fall into. Well, the big one is eating. I mean, pleasuring yourself with the things of the world. Yeah, that's also unfulfilling. Even though you're trying to fill yourself with food or money or uh, cars or whatever it is that you're. I saw this thing. I think it was an English guy that recently made a lot of money and through some way. I don't remember what it was. And they said, what was the first thing you did with all? Well, I bought a Rolls Royce. I said, what a waste of money. What the hell do I need a Rolls Royce for? I mean, I could afford it, so I bought it. But then I thought, what am I going to do with it? Something the world values, but it really didn't have much better just to get a nice, comfortable car.
Absolutely.
Uh,
But then I suppose, fundamentally, if you are seeking for idols,
yes,
idols is lack and scarcity, and ultimately that's compensation for the love of God.
exactly. Right. But you've got to, if you understand that it's compensation, then you don't have to go there.
Sure.
Much
Or
would
you
be
could buy a Rolls Royce knowing that it's not to fill a void within yourself if you wanted a Rolls Royce.
yeah, better use the money to help some people that need money.
Exactly. Yeah.
You can afford luxury, then you can afford to be helping people.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So, did you have a sense of like taking you back again to the early stages of your life with the course? Was there a feeling within the gang? I like to call them the Fab Four. Like instead of calling the Beatles the Fab Four, I like to think of Helen and Bill and Ken and Judy as the Fab Four. Looking in on that close unit, what did you feel like anybody was like grasping it quicker, or were they getting their heads around it as a collective in the different ways that they were as individuals, or quite interested in that?
Well, I guess in terms of the sequence on that, I think Bill got it. I think Bill got it first,
Right.
and Ken. Helen kind of knew all along, and of course Judy. I knew Judy prior to any of them. It
Wow.
was sort of interesting, right? Because Judy and I had been friends since the late 60s. And
Wow.
so when it was interesting because I was introduced to the course before Judy, but not long before, just like 6 weeks before her.
Okay.
And then when I heard that she was getting into it, I thought, well, that's sort of interesting. Not only that, but she was really taking fire with it. I
Wow.
thought, well, maybe you should be paying more attention to. One of the biggest regrets of my life, but you don't think about it being a regret at the time, is that I was invited to join the four of them in going through the workbook in like 1976. And I said no, because I was so busy. I was working on a doctorate at the time. I was teaching in the university. I was taking care of a church. I was having these relationships, I was a young man and I was still looking for my wife
Sure.
and not finding her. Eventually, of course, I did. So, but that would have taken time. I would have had to gone to Judy's house to do that, even though that would have been a possibility where we didn't live that far apart. But anyhow,
We'd have had to
that's
have got you cloned.
well, yeah. I mean, I got it. It worked. Ken was the main guy for me.
Okay. It's amazing. I
Yeah.
didn't know that.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Sure. I started sponsoring Ken very early on, right after the course came out. I'd had some experience sponsoring speakers. I worked for an organization called Spiritual Frontiers Fellowship in New York City, and also a place called Wainwright House, which was just outside of New York City. I was
Mm.
programming one of the program directors for them. There were three of us, and so I would start, and I organized from in New York, Then I bought a place outside of New York City in 77,
Mm.
which was going to retreat center.
Yeah.
It was just my home, but it was secluded completely. So they're like, almost 1,000 feet off the road. And I would have Ken come there usually twice a year, every Memorial Day weekend and Labor Day weekends, because those 2 weekends, it didn't look funny that a lot of cars were coming in and out. We could have been having a party. Turns out my neighbors caught wind of what I was doing and they weren't happy about it. And I ran into zoning problems and won't go into all that, but I couldn't use the place for what I wanted to use it for. It couldn't be commercially used to put it. I was in what I called Upper Snobsville, very, very rich area, just north of New York City, Westchester County. But I did a lot of that in New York City at the church I was serving at the time. I had him come speak there and other places, and for Spiritual Frontier Fellowship, places like that.
And when did you feel like, do you remember like a sense of when it really kind of landed in your consciousness in terms of like grasping it, that sort of moment where we go from reading the words to actually understanding what the technique is so that we can then start
Yeah.
implementing it. Can you remember that kind of sense or?
Not really. I mean, I don't really remember there being a specific kind of time on that because the course is very, very deep.
Mm,
And it is kind of a gradual process, and it's probably better to approach it gradually.
mm,
There wasn't there was when I eventually, in 89, I can tell you for sure, 88, 89,
mm.
at that point, I decided that that was all I was going to do.
Ah, okay.
Was just, in fact, as I went to see Ken about, I had a business I owned and the business failed. And so I went to see Ken, and Ken said, "What are you going to do now?" So I'm just going to teach the course. I'm just going to do that. And he says, "That's not easy." And I said, "Not having any trouble." He kind of laughed because it's true. I mean, he was making a living doing it. So, and that did begin to happen at that point. I didn't start looking for anything. I would do the things like teaching university course or two to put money in the pocket, but um, it was in. And I started this magazine, Miracles Magazine,
Yeah,
in 85, 80, in the fall of 85.
amazing,
Still publishing, it's still
amazing. Yeah,
it's
show us,
still
show
still in
us.
still production.
Incredible, isn't it? In 2023 to have a physical copy magazine still.
36 years.
Wow.
Yeah. We've changed a bit to now it says the subtitle is Classroom for the Universal Course. In recognition, as the course says, this is one form of universal course, and
Yes.
realized at some point that I was going to have to expand into not just the course, but the course of love and other things that were similar to the course
Mm,
in order to be able to have a more universal appeal, which,
mm,
and that's right. It made it a good jump up once
mm.
I did that. But we don't have that many. We're now falling off in term because it's the YouTube.
Right.
It's all right there. It's all right in front of you. You don't have to get a magazine, and magazines are not doing as well as they were doing 20 or 30 years ago. That'd be a major source of information, and
Mhm.
yeah, that doesn't exist anymore. Yeah,
Yeah, it's a completely different model, isn't there? I mean, I know from like a
yeah,
musician's point of view, so many of the big magazines over here in England have dropped away, and it's
yeah.
only the ones where we have like a really partisan audience who are
Mhm.
still very keen for that physical copy.
Yeah,
And like you say, with the internet, there's huge phases as a kid when I was interested in other bands and people who were influencing me during my formative years. If they went off the radar for 2 years to work on a new record, you didn't know anything about what they were doing, whether the lineup was still the same, or what they were going to look like, what their new image was like, or what, and then they'd just appear one day with a new album and a sleeve and a new sound,
There
and
you go. Yeah,
yeah, and there we go. And yet now, you know, I would be surprised, I suppose, if any of these artists go a day without telling people what they're up to, you know.
yeah, of course. Yeah.
It's a completely different world out there, isn't it?
Yeah, it just keeps expanding. But there's so much wonderful stuff out there. And it's interesting to me, having been involved in the ministry, that churches are dying just so rapidly.
Mm,
They're there and here both, and all over Europe. But there's a lot of brilliant spiritual teaching going on online.
hmm,
And it's not ordained ministers that are doing it.
mm,
It's just people who develop an expertise in one way or another and
mhm.
can start teaching. And young people, in many cases, by young, I mean like they're only in their 30s or 40s. Of course, I was doing that when I was in my 30s or 40s, but all I had was a pulpit and a classroom to be in. There wasn't a greater sense of being able to do that. Yeah,
No, I
it's fun.
mean they really need to deal with the model. You know, it's something that crops up a lot for me. Is like I'll sometimes use like an analogy with people who say like a car, you know, or anything that you can think of which has got a general symbolic kind of framework. So, you know, if I was to say car to you, and like we've just been talking about Rolls Royce or Bugatti, but equally it could be one of those first cars that used to require you to go around the front of the hood and like spin it to, that's still a car, you know, and a Rolls
Yeah,
Royce is
yeah, yeah,
still a car.
sure.
And you know, I feel like that that all the organized religions, the model, the word God, you know, it
Mm.
can come across to a lot of people as antiquated as those very old motor cars, those initial motor cars, but equally it could be, you know, we're talking about something that in 2023 just come off the production line and does 200 miles an hour or something because
Oh, yeah. Do you know what the major form of communication was 100 years ago in 1923?
go on.
Newspapers.
Right.
Newspapers. And you know how long it took for the news to get to the newspaper and then get it into print and then be out being sold some. Even the radio existed, but it was in its absolute infancy.
Hmm.
You know, very few people had radios in 1923. It wasn't until the 30s that the radios started to get popular, but until the late 30s that people started having them in their homes all over the place.
Wow,
Isn't that interesting?
that's amazing. And
Yeah,
I guess, like, you know, with this thing with the word God as a good example, you know, and not modernizing the model. It's just it
no,
isolates a lot of people, and these organized religions are very fixed, aren't they, on in their
yeah,
mindset. And I guess there are lots of young people who come through who say, "Listen, we need to adapt this, we need to change that to speak to young
oh, yeah.
people," and that's how
Well,
they'll
I'm part
survive.
of something here in New York that's called Interfaith Fellowship or Interfaith. We have
Mm,
a seminary we called All Faith Seminary. That's really the future of
okay.
religion. I'm sure of it. To be honestly, look at all of the universal aspects that exist in the search for truth. It's not just this or just that.
Mm,
It's fine that those individual searches will continue. There's
mm,
no doubt about it, and people will find rewards in those processes. But we need something much more universal, and that's what's happening.
right, I like it.
Yeah.
That does fit the way the world is. It's just a huge melting pot now, isn't it? And you know, you
Yes,
can,
exactly.
even from a music point of view, you know, when people make a
Yeah.
playlist on their phone, they don't make it from one genre, do they? They
No,
pick
yeah,
from
right.
all the different genres, and that's. Or if you were going out for a meal, or if you were putting a meal on for a bunch of friends, you'd probably make it out of dishes from different parts of the world. It's just
Sure.
it's the way things are now. And if
Mhm.
those guys want to move with the times, they're going to have to remodel.
Yep.
Reminds me of a good little joke that I heard somewhere along the line. It said God and the devil are walking down the road together, and God sees something on the floor and he picks it up, puts it in his pocket, and the devil looks over at him and goes, "What was that?" And God goes, "Oh, it's the truth." And he goes, "Oh, if you give that to me, I'll organize it for you."
All right. Now we're in trouble. The good news is you can't organize it in that sense. It has its own form
That's it.
of. There's definitely always an expansion going on in consciousness, so there's just no doubt about it, and it's getting faster
Yeah.
and faster. It's almost like you can't keep up with it.
Well, I like that because again, this is the second thing that I've written down, which you've almost answered before I asked you, which was I'd like to hear your take on the celestial speed up.
Well, we're experiencing the celestial speed up right now with all this information that's available to us, and this and the depth of things like the church.
Mm.
That's a part of it. The old has always got it. I love Buckminster Fuller. You know, Buckminster Fuller
Yeah.
said, "You don't change the old by by crushing it or destroying it. You transform the old by making it obsolete through superior methodology." So the superior methodology is automatically makes it obsolete. You don't get rid of it by resisting it. Resisting it, that's silly. Fighting against it, and why fight against it? It's going to disappear on its own because something better has come along. It's that simple. Something better come along. You're gonna use the better thing. Just like we're talking, isn't it sort of amazing? You're in England, I'm here in the States, and it's like we're sitting in the same room.
Yeah.
One day I was teaching, there was somebody in South Africa, somebody in Australia, somebody in England, and somebody here, and we were having a dialogue in five different, very different places in the world.
Crazy. And only
Real time.
Nikola, only Nikola Tesla could have predicted that.
True. He could have.
So the celestial speed up is underway, evident.
It's really happening
Hmm.
in terms of the expansion of consciousness. You know who first started talking about this was actually Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. Chardin was a French Jesuit priest.
Hmm.
Well, he was talking about, I used to teach courses on Chardin
Hmm.
back in the 70s, and he was talking about a world wide web of consciousness. He used that
Yeah, he
phrase.
did use that.
Use that phrase, the World Wide
Wow.
Web, right? Well, there was no such thing as a World Wide Web at that particular point.
Goodness.
But he saw that it was happening, it was going to be happening around the whole world. He died in 1955, and there was no such thing.
Wow.
Yeah, right.
Because I thought Pete,
Network, another word he used was network, a network
okay.
of network. We got a network.
I thought Pete Townsend from The Who came close to being quite prophetic when he was writing a story around 1971 about people connected from their homes by plugging into a system, and he used the word grid. And I often think
Yes.
if he'd have just said net.
Net, grid, it's all the same thing, right? The obvious words are there when we find need for them. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
amazing. And also, I'm interested in, like, when you do your teaching, um, the part in there's a part in, well, there's two things actually. I'll come to that in a second. Also, there's a thing that I was going to ask you about with Helen being psychic, having psychic sort of propensity, didn't she? And then I wondered about when we've got our psychic powers desirable in the manual for teachers. And obviously, this work was kind of for Helen and Bill initially before they shared it. I wondered
Right.
what your take on that was in terms of how personal a message that might have been for her, and then
Right.
obviously how general it is for all of us.
Well, you know, the whole course got started when Bill turns to Helen one day and says they weren't getting along with each other and said there's got to be another way. There's got to be some way that, and Helen says, you're right, and
Yeah,
I'll help you find it.
yeah.
And then they really always thought the course was that answer that it began to come to her.
Mm.
Path was there. She did an interesting psychic thing with me. She did several interesting psychic things with me, but one of them was is when I bought this place, what I was going to have as a retreat center.
Oh, yeah.
It's called High Rock Spring. And and after I put a down payment on the place, Helen said, it's not going to work. I said, what do you mean it's not going to work? I already put a down payment on. You know, I don't tell me that. You know, it's like, oh, how do I pull out of this and go find another place and all that? So, and it was interesting. Bill intervened at that point. And Bill, this is sort of psychic on Bill's part. And he said, don't worry, it'll work out. Right, it'll work out. And then there was a zoning board meeting, and they decided the zoning board that I couldn't use it for what I was going to use it for.
Right.
And Helen called me the next morning, and she says, "How did it go? I mean, how did?" And I said, "You were right. The zoning board says you can't do that here." Yeah, but it did work. I mean, I kept everything quiet. Didn't couldn't advertise in the local community. Advertised in New York City instead, and it was never big, but it still worked. A community developed, a fellowship developed around that particular place, and people would come there. We just kept it quiet,
Mm.
and uh, so they both were right in a way. And then I sold the place for a lot more money than I bought for, than I paid for. So that was very helpful as well. So you just never know. But you know, I could have paid attention to her, but I didn't.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a sense of that being a personal message for her? You know, are psychic powers desirable? Or do you think it's like anything can be applied by Holy Spirit or ego, whatever it is?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Mm.
You just have a different direction. You just take a different, slightly different road. You're still going to get back to the main road. That's all.
Amazing.
The
So
main
yeah,
road was faster, but that's all. There's something to learn on the side road as well.
yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Beautiful. So the other thing I was thinking about from the manual for teachers is I felt like it'd be nice to ask you about the section where it says, "Can God be reached directly?" And I just wondered whether or not that's something that you touched upon. Obviously, you've been through the text with your groups over and over and the workbooks and
I haven't used that, uh,
okay.
but obviously the course talks a good bit about revelation.
Mhm.
And so revelation is direct, and that's you remember that experiences you told me about before we started talking together,
Yeah.
where you heard, well, that's not unusual really for especially for somebody that's been doing this work
Mm.
and you've been doing it for a while. And it's like the deeper that you go, and the deeper that you kind of dig into this, the more you kind of open it up.
Right.
Other extreme to then having something like a direct communication come to you, or
Mm.
just a simple insight. You just aha. It's that ahas and insights are basic to mystical experiences. You know,
Mm.
where you just put the pieces come together, but you've got to dig in to find what the pieces are. You know, I said recently in another workshop that I think you can use A Course in Miracles as a preventative for Alzheimer's. And somebody said, that's nonsense. How come, how you can't use it for, and I don't mean the Course in Miracles, anything that it requires you're digging deep. If you're a scientist or you're a musician, you're an artist or some sort, you know, you keep going down and there, you got to get those brain things, the firing, you know, this
Mm.
neurons firing. And the
Mm.
more those things can fire, the more energy that's going on, the more connections they're making,
Yeah.
the less, the less likely it is that you're going to be losing those connections.
Mm.
It's when we start getting lazy.
Mm.
You want to waste away or do you want to wake up? Yeah, well, if you're wake, and that happens to people my age, I see them. I see they're going to sleep. Oh, don't go to sleep. Wake up. Start waking up now. It's just the same thing as with exercise with muscles.
Yeah.
If you don't use those muscles, they atrophy, right? They
Mm.
start to disappear. But not only should you use them, but you need to use them more
Yeah.
as you get older. So you need to use more of that energy in order to really keep the exercise, and it's true spiritually speaking as well. You got to be engaged in this kind of spiritual exercise by which you also then apply the principles in your life, like generosity and honesty and being truthful in terms of and listening to people and being willing to move into your integrated depth in relationships.
Mm.
There's other ways as well, but all those things, taking meditation more seriously,
Yeah.
or find any pathway that you're going to take more serious, but then really do it.
Yeah, there's a huge element, that I like to sort of, I suppose, I'll explain to people that this started without a blueprint, this podcast, this channel, and the themes have revealed themselves in motion.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. So there's definitely like a sense of wanting to amass a toolkit, an experiential toolkit based on the collective understanding of all of the, say, for the
Sure.
sake of the 19 guests so far, and my contribution to the conversations and the
Right.
contribution to the comments is we get some amazing comments, to the
Okay.
videos of people putting their perspective on topics. So it really is a melting pot, like, and thoughts increase in strength when minds are joined. And one of the huge aspects is like, we don't want a theology. We don't want to just like sit here and for me to go, John, what's your favorite chapter? Could you read it out? And I'm not saying there's no value to that, because
No, of
obviously,
course there is value.
but really, for where this fits in the spectrum and what this
Mhm.
brings to the table, it's about trying to tap into people's application of the ideas, making it experiential, making it useful, truly helpful, so
Yeah,
that we can all share from each other's thinking and go, how can I raise my vibration so that I'm having more of the good stuff, so that I'm having a happier dream all the time. And
right. That's what we call an expansion of consciousness, right?
yeah,
Not
nice.
just if you can, then also watch cells divide, like on TV or something, where they go in like this, they go in, and you
Mm.
got four, 8, 16. You know, that's the way it works in nature.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if it works in nature, that's the way it works in us. We're part of nature. Yeah. Miracles are natural, principle number 4. When
Yeah.
they don't occur, something has gone wrong.
I'm starting to get the sense that you've already had a look at my notes here, because I've got for the next bit to
Well,
follow on.
you did talk about this psychic thing, didn't you?
There we go.
No, it's nothing to do with that.
Brilliant. But I've got here, in terms of explaining the themes of the channel, but also tying that into some stuff of yours that I've been listening to this week. Another thing on there here is like talking about how soon as people who've had the traumatic experience clear that trauma, then what we find underneath that is this altruism, which has just been dormant because they've been so consumed with their self that they then serve. And you were
Exactly.
talking about how natural it is to give, but not for gain, because giving itself is the gain. And then I've got next to that, miracles are natural. When they don't occur, something's gone wrong.
There you go.
Does that mean I just like put a line through that? We've spoken
Okay, well, just cross that one off. A good example of that would be something like an addiction of some sort, right? That
Mm,
would be something that's gone wrong.
hmm
You know, that individual who had the potential to grow and expand got trapped in an addiction, like an alcoholic or something like that.
mm,
I was talking to somebody one day who'd been through Alcoholics Anonymous and all that.
hmm
And he said that he was beginning to become clear in his thinking, but actually quite a while afterwards, like several months after, he realized that his thoughts were so clear now, and he didn't even realize how blocked he was until he was free of that addiction.
mm,
And oh my God, I can think so much clearer now. But the alcoholic doesn't even realize
no.
that, or any kind of addiction that's going on.
Yeah, because I think that, with addictions, aside from the physical element to it, the psychological element is actually stronger. In my own experience, um, the belief that life could be as good without the substance, the belief that a
Yeah,
cup of tea could taste as nice without, you know, smoking a spliff or something, or watching a
right,
sunset, or eating something beautiful, and it becomes like it becomes part of the thinking that it's something aside from the physical thing. With a withdrawal, if your body is screaming out for something it's been used to having for a long, long time, then that's a difficult process to get through. But with some of these things, the psychological element is greater. And we know that with alcoholics, because someone will say, I'm an alcoholic. And you go, oh, right, okay. And they'll say, but I haven't drunk for 35 years, 8 months, 2 weeks, and 1 day.
right.
And that just shows you how powerful this connection can be, can't it?
Yeah,
But there's a real psychological element of like when you come through the other side and you do drink a cup of tea and it is just as nice without the
right,
substance, it's like that needs to be gone through X amount of times to then replace this other belief that things were upside down and on their head from the way they really are.
that's where the work comes in. This is the Course in Miracles is work.
Mm.
We have a workbook, and you got to work the workbook. You can't just sort of, okay, I read that.
Mm.
You got to actually do what it's asking you to do. That's what Helen once said to Jesus. This isn't working for me. Was right. And Jesus said to Helen, well, why don't you do what I'm asking you to do so you can hear my voice even better? And she could hear it really good. You know?
Amazing.
A main problem, I was listening to a lecture by Ken recently on the phone, and the main problem in psychology, Freud ran into this early on,
Mm.
was resistance. The resistance is a big problem. It's like resistance to doing the work.
Mm.
And Freud said, for example, there was this thing that would happen in therapy where he'd be working with somebody, and all of a sudden the person would come and say, "I'm out, I'm cured, I'm well, everything is working good, so bye."
Okay.
And Freud is saying, "Yeah, okay, that person is just on the verge of beginning to get into the deeper, and they become frightened by the depth.
Yeah.
And so they declare themselves well, so that now they don't have to look."
I might use that as my Facebook status. I declare myself well.
Yeah, right.
T-shirt, baseball
Yeah,
cap.
yeah. I'm all rational and logical now, and of course I still yell at my wife, but it's a what? Or whatever.
Do you find like strong themes with the classroom? So that like when you're going through the workbook, do you see like is it a very even spread of what people are quick to grasp or struggle with? Is that universal or is everyone different? I mean, how many times have you guided people through the workbook now over the years?
Well, both are true. On the one hand, we're different people, so we struggle with different parts of it. But one that I've noticed lately is the difference between perception and knowledge. You have
Right.
to really understand what that means. The course talks to me, okay, I get that. Well, yeah, but do you really get that? I mean, that it's perception is inherently judgmental. It's inherently divisive
Mm.
and dualistic, and there's a whole wholly not HOL what wholly another way of seeing this, but you have to kind of like really see it to see it. I don't
Mm.
know how, right? It's not just like not just cognitively, but
Yeah.
expansively, right?
Yeah.
Experientially.
Nice.
That's where you got to move from just the thought to the experience.
Mm.
Yeah,
So
that's
in that context, is thought perception and knowing is experience.
right. You know it to be true,
Mm.
or instead of thinking it's probably true. Just like saying to somebody, "Are you in love?" And they say, "Well, I'm not sure." Well, you're not. Because if you were, you would have said yes right away.
Yeah,
Yeah. It's not a wishy-washy kind of thing. You're either there or you're not there.
yeah. Because
Uh,
could you have perception with your eyes closed, I suppose?
yeah. Right.
Or does perception require your eyes to be open?
Very. Yep.
So I've got a good little section here that there's quite a bit here that came to me that I thought, oh, hold on a minute, I'm going to jot this down. And it kind of came from the initial kind of germination of the seed of thought was thinking about forgiveness. Forgiveness quietly waits, watches, does nothing. Forgiveness just allows things to be. And then there's a part of it which would be quite easy to kind of like not put equal emphasis on, but I just find that it's really powerful where it says when somebody doesn't forgive, they also have to justify their failure to forgive.
Hmm.
And I'm interested. So what I've got written here is when we realize or experience the knowing that we're all one, apparently fragmented self, and we therefore grasp the futility of judging another person for where they appear to be along the road to true understanding, then the irrelevancy of the distraction to judge has got more clarity. So, would you say that to justify the failure to forgive is a secondary phase, at first obscured by engaging in the act of casting judgment?
Yes.
Next question.
Okay.
But
The thing that's hard about forgiveness, and it really the place we get stuck, is that all forgiveness, and of course says this pretty clearly, but we somehow don't hear it, is self-forgiveness.
mm,
You're really forgiving yourself.
mhm,
But it's not till you realize that you're forgiving yourself that it begins to have merit. but I mean, you're looking back at the judgment that you've made. It's not that there's something wrong with that person. There's nothing there. It's just that you've made the judgment that there's a problem there.
Mm.
So what you're doing, you're forgiving yourself for having made that projection
Mhm.
onto that individual.
Mm.
So what you really need. I just wrote about this afternoon
Wow.
because I'm for a Sunday with Mundy piece that's coming out on
Wow.
Sunday, obviously,
With who?
because because it's Christmas, and so I'm trying to get to the theme of innocence, because that's what we at Christmas we're looking at the innocent, a baby.
Yeah.
This is innocence. This is the wholeness. That's why we celebrate. What we're celebrating is the innocence.
Mm.
You've got to really see the innocence, even in the dark place, the really dark place of the murder of whatever. And there's somebody that's done something outside in the world that is maybe a horrendous thing, but deep in God doesn't see it that way. Right in the God does not condemn. That's a very short, 4 words sentence. It's in the course. God does not condemn, but that's true.
Mm.
When Jesus is on the cross and he says, "Father, forgive them; they know not what they're doing," he did not say that so God would understand how to handle the situation. God, you know.
Brilliant.
He said it so that we would understand how to handle much less severe circumstances when it seems as though we're being persecuted, right? Right.
Oh, wow.
Because we have to be the one that understands that and sees the innocence
Mm.
in all things. And everyone is innocent.
Mm.
But if you can't see the innocence in a Hitler or a Putin or whatever it is, and it's there. It's all obscured. I mean, you really can't. There's so much garbage on top of it. You can't get through to that little point of wholeness.
Mm.
But that's what the course is at. The course is asking us to see the point of the wholeness that's there in the infant,
Mm.
right? The innocent infant. That's what we think. Innocent infants are innocent, right?
Mm.
At least that's what we're told. They are. A lot of and they're pure. In other words, another word we use. So
Mm.
untarnished, spotless. That's what immaculate means. Spotless means.
Mm.
Immaculate means spotless.
Mm.
A mackerel is a spotted fish. That's true.
Amazing.
So the course is asking us to go so far and so deep to see the wholeness in every one and everything without exception. There's no judgment to be made at all.
Mm.
That's the hard part. And we fall into judgment so easily as human beings. Just look at conversation. The conversations people have, so much of the conversations about one kind of judgment or another. That's pretty and ugly are judgments. Pretty is a judgment too.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Knowledge is completely beyond that.
Mm.
There's no pretty and ugly in heaven.
Superb. Because I think, that is a really powerful part of that phrase of the what is forgiveness. It's like it's describing, because another thing that's come up a few times on the channel is how passive forgiveness is, and therefore it only sort of summons up a judgment, only summons up a definition when it has an opposite, which being judgment. If there was no such thing as the capacity to judge, then we wouldn't need to give attributes to forgiveness, because it would just be an aspect of love.
Right.
But this secondary kind of, I see it as like, I think I wrote a couple more things about it. So, it's like enmeshed and part concealed, this. And also a quote from the course, which the foundation used in their newsletter this week, which was, "You cannot enter into real relationships with any of God's sons unless you love them all and equally."
Exactly the same thing.
Exactly. Because
So, like, if we take what's going on right now in Gaza, you got to love the Palestinians and the Jews. You got to love both of them.
Mhm.
You can't take up sides.
Because God is omnipotent, and God is everywhere, and the totality of God is in everyone and at every point. The absence of God isn't possible, whether even if somebody isn't aware or doesn't think they're aware of God, then that's like one maybe one little spot on the mackerel, but it's not real at the true level. So therefore, there's nowhere where God isn't. So
That's right. Yes, that's, and the course says that. There's nowhere that God is not. We could just say there's nowhere that love is not.
yeah.
So we cover it over with all this other stuff, all this other judgment and stuff.
Mm.
So we can't see past the judgment.
And then once we have projected the judgment, excuse me, and somebody
Exactly.
feels uncomfortable about the judgment, then they're left with that secondary hit of like their failure to try and justify their failure to forgive is like maybe something that they're going to keep in the shadows,
Sure.
because that's where you really need to look. It's like an underlying undercurrent to what appears to be going on. But the two are one, really, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly. Well, there's no dualism. There just is.
The isnesses, as the dove from above likes to say.
Uh-huh. Or being. Being is another word. Being, of course, is just a being is a state in which the mind is in communication with everything that there is. That's a direct quote from page 70. Or
Yeah.
presence is another good word. Just
Yeah.
pure presence, pure presence. All right. All right. All right. Then there's no judgment. Yeah.
Be
Yeah.
still and know that I am.
Exactly.
So another thing that I like to ask people about is the context for the perceived separate self within the context of oneness. So say like the 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 fact that it can't really translate, people have this idea that they're separate, and therefore maybe going back to what we were saying about the organized religions and the basis of them being set up in a dualistic kind of way, people then struggle to understand how their separate self is going to fit into oneness, and how Leon is going to be in heaven.
It fits in a very beautiful way. It's like just another cell in the body or another star in the heavens, or it has its own part to play, but it can't be played without the whole, you know, it's all connected. Right.
Nice, that's an original response.
Well, like you know, you're a musician, right?
Mhm.
So that's your part. That's a part that you play in the universe. You create music, which is a beautiful thing to do, or an artist or a writer or whatever you're doing, that's your part. Do it. Do it well. Yeah, and do it really, really well that people appreciate it and you feel good about it. Yeah.
And then that dissolution of like that localized point of consciousness into the one mind of God, that's where I think a lot of people's issues rise up for struggling how they're going to exist as a separate self in heaven because of this old model again that we've got.
Well, that's where everything fell apart in the first place, is where we decide that, thank you very much, God, I want to do it myself.
Mm.
And that's Adam, Eve, and the whole thought of separation. But that whole thought can become amplified into becoming a dictator. I'm really going to do it my way.
Mm.
And now the world is messed up because I'm so messed up.
Mm.
Yeah, that's why this is not a sane world. Of course, he's very clear about that.
Mm.
Yeah. Heaven is, but heaven is not our immediate experience. It's not to say that it can't be, that we call that enlightenment.
Wow. Well, I think I might have used up all of my questions as far as I can
Well, good
see
for you.
in front of me. I think you've
Good.
definitely given me a lot to mull over there.
All
Um,
right, good.
Something unusual that come to mind that hasn't happened before, but is there something that you can think of? So normally, obviously, I would ask questions, but it's just occurred to me to say to you, is there something that comes into your
Well,
mind?
the only thing is, to your folks who are watching,
Mm.
it's, this works. I mean, that's the main. This really works. It really produces transformations in people's consciousness. It really helps us to wake up and to not continue to be trapped, so to speak, in some sort of a doctrine or theology or something that's rule ridden places are rough to get through, because then you got to follow a rule. You know, and the rule is follow your own path until you get home. You know, even though things will fall off along the way, of course things are going to fall off along the way, as you the course can be understood as a process of purification. We are slowly learning what's not true. That's what this is all about. What's not true. And then what's true will just be standing there in all of its glory right in front of you, uh, because you got rid of everything else. That's what, the 6 stages in development of trust in the beginning of the Manual for Teachers is
Yeah.
all about, especially the first three. The first three are just about letting go and relinquishing and undoing and sorting out and getting rid of the faults so the truth can come to the fore, which is what makes the course so beautiful. But if I've got a rule-ridden religion, for example, or something that's based on rituals and doctrines which must be followed, then I put myself into a very difficult place. That's one of the problems of the church, is that there are just so many rules. Yeah, and then you have trouble because it's rigid. And it's not to say there's not truth in there, but trying to find your way to that truth, a lot of barriers to get through. Yeah.
And a lot of people who ask questions get told we don't ask those questions here.
Yeah, I've especially heard of other people saying that, and growing up in the people in the Catholic tradition, that you don't ask those questions.
And that goes back 500 years to the likes of like Giordano Bruno or even what Galileo sort of brought to the table 100 years later. Just whoa, hold on a minute,
Yeah, right.
because fundamentally those guys had a very nice setup. They were all living in great big castles, having huge banquets, and sleeping in silk sheets and
Right.
velvet curtains, and having a lovely time. And outside in the world, people probably lived an average age of like 27 years and probably ate soil and like potatoes and lived in a puddle or something for most of the time. And
But,
the
the problem with that is that even with the silk and the velvet and all that, there's an underlying guilt that knows it's wrong, that cannot be satisfied in the world, that the world offers no satisfaction. So no matter how much satisfaction you have, the guilt is still going to be there. And the guilt is the big bugaboo. That's the real stinker. That's if you're not playing God's game, you know it. And you got to get that alignment going on, or otherwise there'll always be disquiet in the mind.
Doesn't that tie into the justifying the failure to forgive? Because that's guilt as well, isn't it?
Yes, of course.
Wow. I'm feeling like there's a mirror behind me and you can see my pad. You've had your eye on my notes for the last hour or so.
Good.
Brilliant.
It's been
Well,
nice being.
well, I'm really grateful.
Yeah, good. Me too.
Yeah.
It's nice to be able to communicate.
And you haven't had to leave the home.
Pardon?
You never had to get on a bus or
Oh,
a
yeah.
plane.
I'll just sit down at the computer and that's it. Amazing world we live in. Yeah.
Excellent. And there's a whole bunch of new teachings classes. I think you said to me you're starting stuff up next year
I'm
again.
starting classes in January 9th, and I have one on actually these classes also fit for people in England
Ah,
because it's on 9 o'clock. It's on Tuesday and Thursday. On Tuesdays it's 8 o'clock at night, which people in England couldn't come to, but on Thursday it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon, which means it's like 6 o'clock in the evening there,
okay.
right? So it would actually work. You
Nice.
could actually come to class at 6 o'clock. Actually, the Miracles Network newsletter's got a little ad about that in January, February issue.
Okay.
People can find out about it if they want to.
Sure.
It works.
And that's
Yeah.
like a group Zoom meeting, or how does that
For the
work?
regular students, and there is a fee to be in the class,
Hmm.
16 pounds per class. But then there's a series of 8 classes. And then I take a break for a while and do some writing and come back and teach another class. And um, I present slides primarily and talk quotes from the course and other things and talk about those. And we dialogue with the students. It's just a normal classroom, but it works.
Good. No, it must be after all this time.
Yeah.
There's been a few workshops, hasn't there, up to now?
Oh, yeah. Quite a few.
Yeah. Maybe you wouldn't like to think about how many.
It would take a lot of work to, not
Brilliant.
necessary to do that.
Well, I'm very grateful for the time that you've
Thank you,
spent.
Liam.
Yeah,
Thank you.
been
Nice
really
meeting
nice.
you.
Yeah, thank you, John. And you
Mhm.
take care.
You
Have a
too?
lovely rest of your evening.
Yeah, you
Where are you
too.
up to in your day? So it's 10:30 here. So
It's
you're 5:30.
5:30, half
Yeah.
five. Yeah,
Okay.
I go check on my wife. We'll probably be having dinner in an hour or so.
Very nice.
There you go.
All right. Brilliant. Thank you so much for
Okay,
coming on
thank you.
and being a guest.
Nice meeting you. And we'll stay in touch. I have your email now, so
Yeah.
I'll ask my assistant to send the digital magazine to you.
Oh, wow. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love
Okay.
to have a look.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good. All right. Peace, bro.
Cheers.
Cheers.